Here's a question I want you to sit with for just a moment. Have you ever set a goal, worked toward it, failed, and then, almost without realizing it, talked yourself out of ever really trying again? You told yourself you were being realistic. You called it wisdom. But what if it wasn't wisdom at all? What if it was your brain literally addicted to the pattern of failure? Because here's what the science is actually telling us. Your brain doesn't just passively experience failure. It learns from it. It adapts to it. And in some cases, in ways that are deeply uncomfortable to admit, it starts to prefer it. Not because you're broken, not because you're lazy or weak, but because of something happening inside your neural circuits that most people never hear about. Stay with me here, because by the end of this, everything you thought you knew about why you keep getting stuck is going to look very different. Let's start with one of the most important psychology discoveries of the last century. Back in 1967, researchers Martin Seligman and Stephen Meyer were studying animal behavior at the University of Pennsylvania. They placed dogs in a situation where they received unavoidable electric shocks, shocks the dogs had no power to stop. Then later, they moved those same dogs into a new environment where escape was completely possible. A low barrier, an open path, freedom just a step away. And those dogs? They didn't move. They lay down. They gave up, even when giving up was no longer necessary. Seligman called this learned helplessness. The idea was that the dogs had learned that nothing they did mattered, and they carried that belief into a new situation where it no longer applied. For decades, this was the story we told. You learn helplessness, you acquire it. And that made intuitive sense. But then, nearly 50 years later, something remarkable happened. Stephen Meyer, one of the original researchers, came back to this question with modern neuroscience tools and found that the original theory had it completely backwards. Passivity in the face of prolonged stress is not something the brain learns. It is the brain's default state. The brain starts passive. It doesn't become passive. And what the dogs who escaped had actually learned, what they had built through experience, was mastery, agency, the ability to override that default shutdown. Let that land for a second. Your brain's factory setting, when faced with repeated pain or failure it cannot control, is to go quiet, to stop generating action plans, to stop trying. That's not a flaw. That was once a survival advantage, conserving energy, avoiding futile effort. But in the modern world, where our stressors are jobs and relationships and self-doubt and social comparison, that ancient circuit is misfiring all the time. Here's the neuroscience behind it. Deep in your brainstem lies a structure called the dorsal raphe nucleus. When you experience aversive events, stress, failure, rejection, pain, this structure activates and releases serotonin into multiple brain regions, including your amygdala and your striatum. That release suppresses your active, escape-oriented behavior. It essentially flips a biological off switch on your motivation to try. Now the key is this. That switch gets flipped whether the situation is actually uncontrollable or just feels that way. Your brain is not checking the facts. It's running a pattern. And the more often that pattern runs, the more often failure triggers that shutdown signal, the more automatic and deeply grooved it becomes. Meanwhile, your dopamine system is also being quietly reshaped. Dopamine isn't just the pleasure chemical people think it is. It's your brain's prediction and learning engine. There's a specific process called a reward prediction error. Your brain's way of calculating whether an outcome was better or worse than expected. When you expect to succeed and you fail, your dopamine neurons don't just stay flat. They actually dip. They fire below baseline. And that dip is a signal that gets encoded into memory, influencing how you approach similar situations in the future. What this means in practice is alarming. Over time, if you've experienced enough failure in a particular domain, your career, your relationships, your creative work, your brain starts to predict failure before you've even begun. And when your brain predicts failure, it stops generating the motivational energy you'd need to actually try. The executive regions of your prefrontal cortex, the parts responsible for planning, decision-making, and impulse control, become suppressed. The deeper, more automatic systems take over. And those systems are running an old program that says, "Don't bother." This is why self-sabotage feels so strangely comfortable. It's not that you want to fail. It's that failure has become neurologically familiar. Your brain has optimized around the expectation of it. And the brain, above almost anything else, craves predictability. Or even painful predictability feels safer than uncertain hope. But here is where the story takes its most important turn. Because if agency and mastery are learned, if they are literally built through experience, then they can be rebuilt. The research is breathtakingly clear on this. When you successfully act on a situation and experience real, tangible control over an outcome, your prefrontal cortex, your brain's most sophisticated, most human region, detects that your actions are producing results. It then sends inhibitory signals down to the dorsal rough nucleus, essentially turning off the passivity switch. It overrides the default. And with each repetition of that experience, the connection between your prefrontal cortex and your stress response circuits gets stronger. Researchers describe one finding as particularly stunning. They call it immunization. A single meaningful experience of real control. One moment where you try something difficult and it works can build a kind of neurological protection against helplessness in entirely different situations later. Your brain doesn't just recover from the addiction to failure, it gets inoculated against it. So what does this actually look like in a life? It means that the path out of the failure loop is not motivation. It is not willpower. It is not a better morning routine or a more inspiring vision board. It is engineered experiences of small, real control. Challenges that are hard enough to require effort, but structured enough that success is achievable. Because your brain doesn't need to win big. It needs to win at all. It needs the prefrontal cortex to fire its override signal. And it needs that to happen enough times that the circuit becomes automatic in the other direction. It also means changing how you explain failure to yourself. Psychologists identify 3 dimensions of what they call your explanatory style. When something goes wrong, do you see the cause as internal, something permanently wrong with you, or external and specific to the situation? Do you see it as stable and unchanging, or temporary and fixable? Do you let it contaminate everything about your life, or contain it to this one area? People who consistently explain setbacks as permanent, global, and personal are the most vulnerable to the failure addiction cycle. People who can say, "This didn't work in this situation," either right now are able to protect their prefrontal override from being silenced. Your brain is not conspiring against you. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do, conserve energy, reduce risk, predict the future based on the past. But you are not a dog lying on an electrified floor with nowhere to go. The door is open. The barrier is low. And the most powerful thing neuroscience has ever told us is that the brain that learned to expect failure is the same brain that can learn, with the right experiences, to expect something else entirely. If this shifted something in you, share it with one person who needs to hear it. And drop in the comments. What's one area of your life where you've been running the failure loop without realizing it? I read every single one. See you in the next one.